Ed has a vast resume in the election process through the country and in Alabama. He's a former election administrator with the state of Alabama's Office of the Secretary of State. Please welcome, for the Republican candidate for Secretary of State, Mr. Ed Packard.
Good evening. I'm really glad to be here tonight. I am Ed Packard, and I'm really glad to be here with y'all tonight. Out of the last 8 or 9 days, I've been in Mobile County about half that time. And the other time has been over in Baldwin County, and then I've been up to Huntsville mixed in. So I've been ping-ponging across the state, as many of my fellow candidates have as well. So whether I've been from Bridgeport to Bay Minette or Mentone to Mobile, I'm really glad to be here with y'all tonight. A little bit about myself. My dad was in the Air Force, and so we moved around quite a bit. But back in the early 70s, he was with Auburn University with the Air Force ROTC. And then when he retired in 1980, he asked my mom where she wanted to go to because she'd been following him around a lot of years. And so she picked Auburn. So I spent most of my childhood in Auburn, went to the university, received 2 degrees, then eventually worked for the university as well. So my orange and blue blood is pretty legitimate. I don't think I can get it out of me at all. But so anyway, sometimes people ask me, how did I get where I'm at? Why am I here in front of y'all tonight? And there's actually a Mobile connection to that. If any of you who remember the 1986 Democratic gubernatorial primary, and particularly the primary runoff, you'll remember that Bill Baxley was lieutenant governor, Charlie Graddick was attorney general at the time. And Charlie Graddick issued an attorney general's opinion that year saying that Republicans could cross over into the Democratic runoff, which at the time, that was the law. Neither party had an anti-crossover voting rule at the time. So we get to the primary runoff election day. Charlie Graddick beats Bill Baxley by somewhere around 8,700 votes. Bill Baxley then contested the election to the State Democratic Executive Committee. They sided with Bill Baxley and they threw out the election. Then they handpicked Bill Baxley to be their candidate. And those of you who were politically conscious at the time, you'll remember there was a backlash across the state of Alabama, and we ended up electing the first Republican governor in 112 years, which was Guy Hunt. I had just graduated from high school, June of that year. That was my first election year. And I was going to be an aerospace engineer, like my brother. And my dad was in the Air Force, so I enjoyed being around airplanes. But when that happened, I had an epiphany. It was kind of an awakening about our democracy and elections. And I realized that our elections are affected by the laws we have on the books, the way those laws are interpreted, and the way they're implemented. And in that election year, we saw that whether our votes even count or not can depend upon the rules that are in place. My vote got thrown out, like so many other people's votes got thrown out. I was a proud supporter of Charlie Graddick. I love Charlie Graddick. He was conservative. I was a Reagan Republican, but I love Charlie Graddick. And they did him a disservice, and they did a disservice to the people of Alabama when they did that. So I decided I didn't want to be an engineer anymore. I wanted to be involved in elections and election administration. So I switched from aerospace engineering to public administration. I had a full ride with the Air Force, but when I switched over to a non-technical major, they pulled the scholarship. Luckily, I had other scholarship money, so I was okay. So I finished my bachelor's. I decided I wanted a master's in public administration. One of my professors knew I wanted to work in elections. He was a national expert in election administration. His name is Robert Montjoy. And he developed custom coursework because there was nowhere in the country that you could be trained on how to do elections and administer elections anywhere in the country. That was brand new. I was the first person to graduate from a Master's of Public Administration degree program in the United States with a specialty in election administration. From there, Auburn University hired me on, and they had contracts with the Secretary of State's office at the time to implement the National Voter Registration Act, which brought mail-in registration to Alabama, It also brought registering to vote and a driver's license to Alabama, as well as registering to vote through other government agencies. I worked on coordinating that for the state of Alabama from 1994 to 1996. I wanted to get into state government, but there was no openings in Montgomery. The state of North Carolina called. They wanted me to apply for a job with the State Board of Elections in North Carolina. So I went up there for a year and I trained their county election officials on how to conduct their elections. Then in 1997, Jim Bennett, as many of y'all may remember him, longest serving Secretary of State in the state of Alabama, he called me and he said, I want you to come back to Alabama. So I came back to Alabama in 1997, and that's where I was for 25 years until I retired in December. I was training probate judges. When I first got in, Red Noonan was probate judge down here. I worked with, I worked with Don Davis too, but, and that's an experience. But anyway, I worked with Aline Barnett, training her and helping her with absentee voting down here. I worked with the Voter Registration Advisory Board, and Terry Lathan, who's here tonight. She was on the Voter Registration Advisory Board, as well as other people. I worked with Shirley Short from the Board of Registrars. I worked on training probate judges, including my opponent, Wes Allen. I helped him out when he was probate judge. But I worked with the probate judges, the absentee election managers, the sheriffs, and the members of the boards of registrars, training them. A couple things that I'm particularly proud of in my career. When Alabama was sued over our photo ID law for voting, the Secretary of State had to name someone to help the Attorney General's office defend us in that lawsuit. John Merrill, current Secretary of State, he designated me to be that person to represent him in that litigation. I was in 10 hours of depositions with liberal attorneys trying to figure out how they could use my words against the state of Alabama. They were not successful with my words or the words of anyone else. Representative Allen, he was interviewed in that lawsuit as well. Working with the Attorney General's office, we were all able to defend successfully our law, and the federal court said, we don't have a problem with your law because you're requiring ID, but you're helping people get IDs as well. So they left us alone. Other states have not been, what's the word? They've not been as fortunate as we've been. I've also worked on over half a dozen absentee voter fraud cases with the Attorney General's office, some over in Dothan, some over in West Alabama, one up in the Jefferson County area. In all those cases, most of them resulted in a conviction by the jury. The ones that did not end up in a conviction was because those individuals pled guilty. So I'm really proud to have been a part of that effort with the Attorney General's office. Some of the things that I would like to do when I get in. One, I think we should have post-election audits after every election, whether it's for president, all the way down to city council and city school boards, or whether it's a tax referendum. Those should all be audited afterwards so that we, the voters, because I'm a voter too, we, the voters, know that the election was conducted properly. Secondly, I think the Secretary of State's office should be given expanded investigatory authority, including subpoena power, so that we can assist the Attorney General's office and the district attorneys in rooting out the voter fraud that is existent in the state of Alabama. I've talked to many people over the years that I deemed highly credible when they told me stories about voter fraud in their counties or their cities. One of the unfortunate parts of that is when we ask the next question, the case falls apart. We ask them, would you be willing to testify in court to what you've seen and heard? And many people say no. They're afraid of people retaliating against them or retaliating against their family, and so they don't want to participate. So that's why a lot of those cases never end up in court. The Secretary of State can be involved in that, where we have the resources to work with reluctant witnesses and help develop those cases to where the Attorney General or the district attorneys can then take that into court. We have precedent for that, the Ethics Commission. That's an executive branch agency that currently has that kind of investigatory and subpoena power that normally is reserved for the Attorney General and the district attorneys. I think the legislature should give that to the Secretary of State. Georgia already has that. They've had that since the early 2000s. We need to get on board with that. Thirdly, the security of our electronic voting devices. Right now, it's not illegal for our voting machines to be connected to the internet. The Electronic Voting Committee, which certifies voting machines for use in the state of Alabama, made a policy decision several years ago, and I was a member of that committee representing Secretary Merrill. We made a policy decision that we would not certify any device for use in Alabama that could be connected to the internet. But the law, that is not in the law. That's just a decision by the committee. That could be challenged in court. And so I've been working with Senator Clyde Chambliss from Prattville, which is where I live. He had a bill this session that would have banned connecting our voting machines to the internet. It came out of the Senate, and then Representative Allen, my opponent, he helped shepherd it through committee in the House, and then it died. They never brought it up for a floor vote in the House. And that's something that the people of Alabama have wanted for years, and the legislature, honestly, they just thumbed their nose at us. So lastly, if you don't know it, your voter information, your information in the statewide voter file is for sale to anybody who wants to buy it. Not your social security number and not your driver's license number, but everything else, your name, your residential address, your mailing address, your date of birth, all of that's for sale. I've been working on this issue since 2008. The legislature needs to change that where we can opt out and protect our information. They've made carve-outs. They made carve-outs for people who've been victims of domestic violence, which was great, because I remember a time when I had to tell those ladies, you know, if you register to vote, your information is going to be out there, and so they gave up their right to vote. That's not fair. They created carve-outs last year for law enforcement, which is good, for judges, which is good. Legislators gave themselves a carve-out where they could protect their information. But the rest of us are stuck with them selling our information, even if we would like it to be private. So we're in short on time, so I would like to close that there. If you would like to be a poll watcher and help in the ensure the integrity of the May 24th primary election, I will be glad to appoint you as a poll watcher, and you can contact me through my website at packard.com. Thank you very much for listening to me tonight, and I appreciate your vote on May 24th.